Hello, and welcome to today's lecture on gender, nonverbal communication, and televised debates, written by Ben Wasike. Not sure how his last name is pronounced, but we're going with Wasike. Wasike's study concerns the nonverbal communication styles used by Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton during the 2016 town hall debate in anticipation of the 2016 general election. Wasike defends this as a good choice as Tombo's brought over a toy. Wasike suggests that this is an appropriate case study to look at for two reasons, both of which have to do with the uniqueness of the two candidates. One is that Hillary Clinton was the first woman to lead a major party bid in a U.S. presidential election, and the other is that Trump has made his reputation on being kind of an outsider, a bit of an unprecedented type of politician. In considering the 2016 town hall debate, it had record viewership and there were high levels of social media engagement. Wasike also tells us a lot about nonverbal communication, which includes movements, posture, and facial expressions. Other commentators say that nonverbal communication is a kind of leakage that candidates cannot always control. That is to say, your face and your body will indicate things that you might not necessarily be monitoring. Nonverbal communication is also quite visible on television because as viewers, we are able to scrutinize things, zoom in on them, and we get angles that are kind of artificial and contrived, not like what you have in a face-to-face conversation. There are also gender-based differences in terms of who is supposed to behave in what way, and this has to do with both the gestures that people do and the way that audiences interpret them. So women, we expect to take on certain kinds of gestures that men wouldn't take on and vice versa, and then audiences will judge people based on whether or not the people whom they are judging conform with gender-based stereotypes. There's a lot of information in the review of literature about nonverbal communication, including the fact that voters prefer politicians who share facial features with them. That is to say that like prefers like. If you see a politician who looks like you, you're going to say, yeah, I think that person's inherently trustworthy because you trust yourself, right? Attractive candidates also have an advantage over unattractive candidates, and this is especially true for female candidates. And wearing a flag is a nonverbal cue that you're patriotic. Smiling can also improve chances, and again, this matters a little bit more for female politicians. Smiles can improve the perception of how persuasive the content that you're saying is, how competent, friendly, approachable, and altruistic you are. This is especially true for women. Women are judged just a little bit more closely on these things than men are. And then affinity, or this has to do with friendliness or the warmth that audiences feel. He's sniffing a plant. That's what he's doing. Tombo, he's sniffing a plant? Okay, so affinity has to do with the perception that you're a nice person and that the voter would get along with you. And this might have to do with raised eyebrows, a raised head, and relaxed but not pursed lips. So if you scrunch your lips up, you look like you're in a bad mood, but if you have a relaxed mouth, you seem like you're approachable. Nonverbal communication also matters in terms of posture. So you know the power pose, or kind of the Superman, Wonder Woman position, that's thought to convey power and dominance in Western cultures in particular, whereas contractive body language or scrunched up body language can convey that you're being submissive. So if you make your body smaller, that's gendered more stereotypically towards what a woman would do, but also it seems to indicate that you're not being powerful. And then, as an aside, people also make judgments about, crossed arms making you look like you're hostile or closed off, openness conveying confidence. Some of that's probably overstated and a little bit of pop science too, though. Another gendered element is spatial distance, and this is gendered against men because audiences perceive men as menacing when they are close or perceived as close to other people, and particularly women. So as a society, it's a social convention that when men loom over women, we consider them to be threatening. This makes sense. Or if they loom over anyone, if you get too close and you present as male, you will look a little bit dangerous. Spatial distance varies. So there's intimate distance, which is 6 to 18 inches. That's quite close. Someone only that you're very, very, very close to would be allowed to get that close to you. Then there's personal distance, which is 1.5 to 4 feet. Social distance, which is 4 to 12 feet. So that's the kind of distance where you'd have a conversation with someone. And public distance, which is 12 or more feet. So that's someone that you're not associating with at all, maybe in a public space, on a sidewalk, something like that. So to give a little bit more of an overview commentary on nonverbal communication and debates, candidates can attempt to control their nonverbal performances, and often they get training about how to do this. So this is something that people know and understand as influential in terms of how audiences perceive candidates and their friendliness and their competence. This also relates a little bit to the X factor or charisma that previous scholars have discussed. Audiences are harshest on those whom they perceive as violating what they should have been doing. So there are expectancies that audiences have, and then there are harsh judgments for expectancy violations. So one of these has to do with whether or not candidates conform to socially accepted norms. We, as audiences, don't like it when people have erratic movements. It makes us edgy. We prefer candidates who are able to control their emotions instead of those who seem very angry or irrational, volatile even. And we prefer people who maintain appropriate social distance. There are a lot of gender-based differences in terms of how we look at different features that we can witness as nonverbal cues. So attire, we judge men and women differently on what they wear. Height, there are different expectations about who will be what size, and also how that has a trickle-down effect on other parts of their demeanor. Tone, women are usually policed a little bit more heavily if they have a harsh tone. Looks, again, it's probably more important for a woman who's running for office to be physically attractive than it is for a man who's running for office to be physically attractive. And then these nonverbal cues that Wasike gets into. So Clinton and Trump are both idiosyncratic, and the results from this case study are not generalizable. I do want to point out, I think it's very fascinating that this image from the LA Times has Clinton in a skirt, which she didn't wear once during the entire campaign for a reason, because of the assumption that it would gender her in particular ways. I think that her campaign worked really hard to make her as gender neutral as possible. So here we get into the methodology that Wasike used. Wasike and a trained coder worked to identify nonverbal cues and whether or not they supported gendered norms. They also judged that the town hall debate was the best forum for examining nonverbal communication because of the stage setup. In most presidential debates, candidates are at a podium and they are supposed to stay there the whole time. So there isn't a lot of motion across stage. The town hall debate is the only one where the candidates might be able to prowl around the stage and have spatial distance come into play. So they had a couple of hypotheses. Wasike had a couple of hypotheses. He supposed that Clinton would smile more than Trump because women are supposed to smile more than men, and that Clinton would maintain eye contact more with Trump, with moderators, with guests, with everybody. And this is again because women are supposed to convey this affinity sort of nonverbal cue more than men do. I'm not saying they should, I'm saying that's the social norm. Clinton did indeed smile more than Trump did, and she smiled more in the second half of the debate than the first half of the debate, but this could have to do with being increasingly comfortable as the debate wore on, or remembering her training or whatever it was. So Clinton smiled in 12% of the frames, and Trump smiled in 1.13 dollar signs of the frames. So that's 1.13% of the frames. Sorry for the typo. In terms of eye contact, it was pretty similar for both candidates, so this does not fully support the hypotheses. Clinton made eye contact a little bit more than Trump did. Clinton made eye contact with Trump more than Trump made eye contact with Clinton. And then Trump made more eye contact with people who weren't Clinton than Clinton made with Trump. So Trump was a little bit more focused with eye contact on the moderators and the audience members than Clinton was. In terms of displays of anger or hostility, lowered eyes is one sign of anger or hostility, perhaps because this is, it's sort of a non-confrontational way of signaling discontent. Exposed lower teeth is supposed to be a sign of anger, and hostile stares are also a sign of anger. So Clinton lowered her eyes more than Trump did, although I reckon this is also a little bit of a gendered thing. It's a non-confrontational way of showing disagreement rather than showing overt hostility. Trump exposed his lower teeth more than Clinton did. Trump displayed hostile stares more than Clinton did. And Clinton had even fewer hostile stares by the end of the debate than she had at the beginning of it. So the author didn't really tell us what he thought of that. In terms of friendliness and affinity, we're looking at relaxed mouth and lips, raised eyebrows, and a raised head position. This is also a little unfair for Trump because his adversary is considerably shorter than he is. So if he's going to be somewhat respectful in this forum, he has to look down a little bit in order to make eye contact with her. So Trump's mouth was relaxed in more of the frames than Clinton's. Clinton had her head raised more than Trump, but also she's like looking up at Trump because of the height difference. And Clinton had raised eyebrows more than Trump. In terms of posture or stance, expansive stance is showing confidence or dominance. Contractive stance is showing submission, supposedly. Clinton used expansive stances more than Trump did, so this is going against the gendered norm. However, it was probably a carefully honed thing to make her seem more like a leader in a more traditionally masculine pose without fully violating any social edicts. Both candidates were mostly in that more contractive pose, however, because they were seated while they were waiting for their turn to speak. Both candidates mostly maintained social distance, so they were mostly 4 to 12 feet apart, which is perfectly normal for this forum and appropriate for the size of the stage. And then there was a moment when it appeared as though Trump was menacing Clinton in the background, but this was actually a trick of the eye because of a camera angle. So I think that there's rightful opportunity for us to criticize a little bit of bias and production technique here, which made Trump look menacing when in fact he was an appropriate distance away from Clinton. So for the overall discussion or results, here's what Wasike had to say. Clinton displayed more affinity than Trump, so she looked friendlier than Trump more of the time. Trump displayed more hostility than Clinton, so he looked more aggressive than Clinton more of the time, based on these markers. Clinton displayed the expansive posture more frequently than Trump, and surveyed audiences tended to say that Clinton won this particular debate, and so the audiences were receptive to it, even though apparently it was a breach of gender norms. But none of this is generalizable, and we're talking about someone who's trying to be president of the United States, so you must look dominant, particularly if people are going to doubt your ability to lead. Probably. That's my guess about why she was coached to do that. Clinton closed the space between herself and Trump in all but one instance where they had the gap between them narrow. So this is also different because it's a move that Clinton could have done to appear a little bit more aggressive. So it was a violation of gendered norms, but nobody remembered that in the news coverage later. And then finally, Clinton was the more seasoned politician of the two of them, and this might have made the audience more favorable to her performance overall, even though she did things that female politicians and women just in the regular world typically don't do. So that concludes this analysis of Wasike's article on nonverbal communication during the 2016 town hall. I'm curious what you think in terms of whether or not Clinton really violated any gendered norms, or if the norms need to change for the way we're now interpreting female politicians in 2020. Thanks for watching.